The movie begins with a message, stating that in early 1995, a hiker went missing in the remote part of mountains of central Oregon. After several sightings, some of the members of the isolated local community began speculating that the missing man had contracted an animal-borne virus, which they called Hill's fever. However, the indigenous people who came before called it Face of the Wolf. After this message, the scene cuts to a little boy named Blake, who lives with his father in his house in the middle of the dense forest. Grady asks him to grab his hunting pack for today's hunting. As Grady and Blake set out on their hunting trip, they pause to take in the breathtaking sights of mountains shrouded in a thick blanket of clouds. Grady tells his son that no matter how many times you see it, this view never gets old. Afterward, they leave. Blake tries to touch the mushrooms in the woods, but is advised not to touch them, as they are very dangerous to come in contact with. Most of the time, Grady is harsh with his son. In a while, they come across a stray deer in the woods. Blake aims at the deer, but it slips away from his target. He turns around and finds Blake nowhere around. While looking for the missing deer, Blake unexpectedly encounters a creature in his gun sight. However, the creature vanishes in an instant. Blake hears growling in the distance, causing him to pull back in fear. Before something bad could happen, Grady comes behind Blake and begins scolding him for wandering aimlessly through the woods. Blake explains that he wanted to get a better shot at the deer. All of a sudden, both father and son hear someone snarling behind the trees. Grady searches for the lurking entity, but can't find it. Hence, the duo gets on a treehouse to evade the creature. A short time later, Grady hears a creature snarling below, but he is also prepared to strike down the creature. All of a sudden, the creature tries to tear down the treehouse. Suddenly, the creature begins to whine below the treehouse. He looks out the treehouse and finds a deer brutally butchered on the ground. He searches for the danger, and just then, a speedy creature appears in his gun sight. Grady is freaked out by a howl echoing through the forest. At night, Grady contacts Dan over the radio and informs him that he has seen the hiker, Face of the Wolf. Whatever we heard about him is real. Blake eavesdrops on all this, standing behind Grady. Dan asks Grady why he went into the forest after dark, looking for something that doesn't want to be found. To which, Grady responds that he was hunting a deer by the river, when he suddenly encountered the face of the wolf in the woods. 30 years later, Blake is fully grown up now, and he has a beautiful daughter named Ginger. Ginger asks him to get her ice cream, but Blake says that he got her the same at the museum. Ginger begins to walk on the guardrail on the road, causing Blake to get mad at her. Nonetheless, he soon realizes that he shouldn't have treated his daughter like this. Hence, he quickly apologizes to her. At his house, Blake cheerfully plays with Ginger, when his journalist wife Charlotte returns home after a hectic day. She hands him the will of his father, Grady Lovell, who bequeathed all his property to his son, Blake Lovell, after his death. He also finds a cluster of keys in the bag. Therefore, with his small family, Blake sets out in a truck for his paternal home. On his way home, Blake loses the way, forcing him to take help from the map. However, there is no network in the phone. Just then, they spot a man in the treehouse, seemingly guarding the area. Charlotte advises him not to talk to that man and move on. Nonetheless, Blake brushes off her warning and calls out to the man, and explains that he has lost the way to Grady Lovell's house, having been away for several years. The man recognizes him in no time and reveals himself as Derek, Dan's son. Derek reveals that not many of them left living up there anymore. He tells him that no one dares to venture out after dark on the mountains. There is no power grid, and therefore there is no electricity here. Derek says that he can lead them to their house. So, Blake lets him get in the car and drives off, and it gets dark on their way home. After driving some distance, Blake spots a creature standing in the middle of the road, causing him to lose control of the truck and crash into the woods. The truck gets stuck in the branches of trees. The door of the car opens on its own, causing Derek to fall to the ground, while Blake and his family scream in fear. Blake asks Ginger to escape through the window. Suddenly, Blake hears a creature snarling below the truck, and soon afterward, an unknown creature shatters the window glass. A little while later, the creature drags away Derek's body, making Blake's blood run cold. He also gets out of the truck and starts rushing to his house with Charlotte and Ginger, through the woods. Moments later, he makes it to his house. Meanwhile, they hear the creature coming after them, compelling them to rush toward the house. Blake unlocks the door and gets inside the house safe and sound, while the creature does its level best to burst into the house. Charlotte and Ginger get horrified upon seeing this. Blake goes into the power room and restores the electricity, lighting up the house. Blake looks out the window, holding a torch, and finds the lawn as calm as a sea. Charlotte asks Blake what that thing was. Then, he responds that he doesn't know it himself. However, he reveals that it sounded like an animal. I looked right at it. When I hit it on the road, it was standing up on its 2 feet like a human being. Following this, he slides the shelf in front of the main door, creating a barrier against the creature. Afterward, he stumbles upon his father's old radio. He turns it on and desperately tries to contact anyone, but receives no response. Shortly after, he smells a strong foul odor in the house. Upon checking the house, he steps into a room and discovers rotten meat dangling from hooks. There, he comes upon a chunk of meat, which he eats after coming outside. After a while, Blake feels some difficulty while chewing it, and shortly after, one of his teeth comes out. Charlotte finds his hand wounded. Without any delay, she washes the wound with an antiseptic solution. Blake reveals that he cut it on the window in the truck while encountering the creature. Charlotte winds a bandage around the forearm to stop the bleeding. While nailing the shelf, Blake accidentally smashes his fingers, causing him to feel immeasurable pain. As a matter of fact, Blake starts going through strange bodily changes after encountering the face of the wolf. He hears the thumping on the roof. Therefore, he goes upstairs to investigate it. He opens the door and finds only a spider crawling on the wall. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washes over him, but he manages to brace himself up. He comes downstairs and hears footsteps approaching. He starts sniffing like a wolf and stops near the door. Just then, the creature grabs his feet, pulling him to the ground. Charlotte picks up the axe and attacks the creature with it, forcing it to leave Blake. Charlotte helps him sit against the door, while he screams in pain. Moments later, he wakes to find himself on the couch. Now, he can hear Charlotte's voice in the distance. Hence, he follows her voice and walks into the basement and discovers her trying to contact someone for help over the radio, but again no one replies. She turns around and sees Blake's deteriorating condition, as he pees in his pants. So, she helps him to bed. Blake notices that his hair has started falling off. Charlotte approaches him and asks him to write down what's wrong with him. Then, he writes, "dying." Charlotte reassures him, saying, "You are just sick and we are going to fix you, because we need you, and Ginger needs her father." However, Blake can't understand what Charlotte says to him and begins seeing her through a wolf's eyes. Ginger also arrives there and witnesses her father's worsening condition. Blake starts bleeding again, prompting Charlotte to check on his wound. She instructs Ginger to go to her room. And afterward, she removes the bandage and finds that the infection has spread significantly up his arm. All of a sudden, Blake begins consuming his own flesh like a wolf, while Charlotte witnesses this horrifying sight. Without a word, she leaves in utter shock, and approaches the window and finds a truck parked outside. Immediately, she heads into the basement and retrieves the batteries. She takes Blake and Ginger and moves out of the house quietly, and starts fixing the truck. After several attempts, she manages to start the truck, but a Wolfman appears on the hood, terrifying everyone inside. The creature smashes through the windshield and tries to get hold of Charlotte. Charlotte, along with her daughter and husband, gets off the truck and runs toward the tent. They all climb onto top of the tent to escape the creature. The Wolfman enters the tent in search of the family, while the entire troubled family is on the roof of the tent. Moments later, the creature senses their presence and begins tearing at the tent with its claws, terrifying Ginger. Ginger almost falls through the ripped fabric, but her parents pull her back just in time, before the creature could grab her. Blake instructs Charlotte to run toward the house with Ginger and he jumps off the tent himself to save his family, using himself as bait. Charlotte rushes to the house escorting Ginger. She unlocks the door, gets inside and slams it shut. Ginger angrily accuses her mother of leaving Blake outside to get killed by the creature. But she replies that he is trying to save them. Just then, Blake knocks on the door. Charlotte recognizes him and unlocks the door to let him in. Blake gets in and sits down near the chair. His face has now taken on a plainly wolf-like appearance. Ginger draws near Blake, placing her hand on his forehead. She reveals that she loves him so much. Suddenly Blake vomits the flesh he had consumed earlier, horrifying Charlotte and Ginger. Blake gets up and goes to Charlotte, growling. He looks straight into her eyes and struggles to contain himself, while Charlotte bravely stares back, showing no sign of fear. Shortly after, he then moves to the door, but as soon as he opens it, a Wolfman attacks, knocking him down. The creature begins mauling Blake. Just as the nefarious creature is about to kill Blake, Charlotte stabs it in the back to save Blake. However, the Wolfman is not affected by this attack, and turns to retaliate, but Blake intervenes and keeps him off his family. However, Blake is no match for the mighty Wolfman, who savagely beats him up and begins dragging him from the house. Charlotte desperately strives to stop him, giving some time to Blake for recovery. Seizing the opportunity, Blake lunges at the Wolfman and after a bloody fight, he eventually kills him. Afterward, he notices a tattoo on the creature's hand, revealing it to be his father, Grady Lovell. Upon learning this, Blake becomes chapfallen and leaves the house. He goes outside and starts transforming into a full-fledged Wolfman under the moonlight. In this wolf form, Blake can clearly see his stuck truck, even in the darkness. In the house, Charlotte explains to Ginger that this is your grandfather. A while ago, he went into the woods for hunting but never returned. Everyone considered him to be dead, but instead, he got infected by the face of the wolf there in the woods, and this way, he gave his sickness to your father. Shortly after, Blake knocks on the door and he seems to be saying something but can't say a word in this wolf form. And afterward, he leaves. Charlotte hears footsteps on the roof, forcing her to grab a knife. Soon, she encounters Blake-turned-Wolfman, who tries to harm them, causing Charlotte to attack him with the knife. He snatches the knife. Meanwhile, Charlotte with her daughter escapes outside and takes shelter in a shack. Blake tries to smash through the door. He sees Charlotte and Ginger through his wolf's vision, whereas the mother and daughter are unaware of his presence around them. Blake moves forward and gets caught in a trap, scaring Charlotte and Ginger. Charlotte and Ginger escape into the forest, leaving Blake in the shack. Blake can't free himself, so he starts consuming his own leg, freeing himself from the trap. He comes out of the shack, crawling, and heads into the woods, chasing Ginger and Charlotte. Now, the man, who always protected his family, is hunting his family. In the woods, Charlotte and Ginger come across a severed hand of Derek. Additionally, they discover their truck still stuck among the trees. Ginger asks her mother to hurry up, as Blake is rushing toward them, growling. She picks up the gun and gets ready to take the bulls by the horns. She finds Blake on the truck, lurking around them. They run to a treehouse and hide in it. In a while, Blake also gets there and ascends the treehouse. Charlotte is prepared with her gun at the ready. Blake comes near them and acts as if he were begging Charlotte to shoot him. Ginger says to her mother, after feeling her father's pulse, that he wants this to be over. Blake snaps at Charlotte for delaying the process, causing her to shoot him. They get down from the treehouse and behold Blake, as he was their protector before turning into a wolfman. In his last moments, Blake finds his wife Charlotte and beloved daughter, Ginger, whom he always loved more than anything else in this world, sitting near him. And soon afterward, he leaves this world, while Charlotte and Ginger mourn over his death. In the closing scene of the movie, before leaving the town, Charlotte and Ginger are seen seeing the mesmerizing sight, which Blake used to see with his father, and with this scene, this movie comes to an end.